Hi, I'm Kaylin. For 6 years I paid their bills, covered their debts, fed their pride. Then a fire took everything I had. And when I stood at my mother's door shivering, asking for a place to stay, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't a shelter." That was the moment I realized I was only valuable when I was useful. So I cut every penny. And by morning, my phone was vibrating with 69 missed calls. But it was already too late. Before we dive in, what would you have done in my place? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. I still remember that one Sunday, I must have been 12, I folded the dinner napkins into little maple leaves, watched a YouTube tutorial and everything. I even ironed them so the creases looked real. When I placed them carefully around the table hoping for a smile, my mother just looked down and muttered, "Why do you always have to overdo everything?" Then called for Camille to bring the dessert. She praised the pie. My napkins forgotten. Funny how moments like that never really leave you. The house was gone. I parked 2 blocks away because the road was still taped off. Fire trucks had come and gone. The air of wet wood and something darker, like a memory burned alive. Black skeletons of beams jutted out of what used to be a living room. The porch had collapsed inward, and the white paint that once made it look quaint now streaked in gray ash across scorched bricks. The house I paid for. The home my family lived in rent-free while I lived in a studio apartment 4 miles away. Just in case they ever needed me. Mom used to say, "No one called me." Not when it caught fire. Not when the insurance adjuster came. Not when the Red Cross arrived. I called them. My mother picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice had the tone of someone being mildly inconvenienced. "It's all gone," she said flatly. The fridge, the china set, Camille's photos. Nothing left. I waited for a pause, for the words, "Thank you for keeping the insurance up to date, for wiring the premiums all those years." Instead she added, "Camille says it was faulty wiring. We told you years ago that place needed work." I drove back to my studio only to find the entire hallway underwater. A fire in the next building had triggered the sprinklers again. My carpets were soaked, the air thick with mildew. I stood there for 2 hours in the smell before my knees gave in and I sat on the floor. No one to call, no one who'd come. So I drove to Upper Saddle River. The rain made it worse, icy, insistent, and personal. By the time I turned into the long stone driveway, my jeans clung to me like skin. I barely remembered to take the keys out of the ignition. I rang the bell once. My mother opened the door, half in shadow, arms crossed. She wore one of those silk house robes that looked expensive and cold. The foyer behind her glowed with warm lighting, and Camille stood by the kitchen island in a cashmere wrap, nursing a glass of wine. She saw me, said nothing. "I just need a few nights," I whispered. "Until I figure something out." My mother exhaled, sharp and slow. "This isn't a shelter, Kaylin. You're not some refugee." I swallowed. "Just until I can find another apartment. Ask one of those charities you donate to, or one of the cousins you covered tuition for." She gestured vaguely behind her. "Try using all that generosity for yourself." Camille didn't move, just tilted her head slightly as if watching a rerun she'd already seen a dozen times. I didn't beg. I turned back into the rain, the cold so deep it started to feel like armor. I sat in my car, engine off, windshield fogging. Drops rolled down my cheeks and I wasn't sure if they were rain or me. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. I waited 5 minutes. 10. Nobody followed. Nobody texted. I had transferred $1,200 to Camille 2 weeks ago for her emergency vet bill. Bought groceries for my parents every Thanksgiving. Covered Dad's cholesterol meds for the last 2 years without a word. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to go. By the time I reached Route 17, my thoughts weren't even thoughts anymore, just facts rearranging themselves into sharper truths. They hadn't just forgotten me. They deleted me. I was useful until I wasn't. Until I needed something. Until I showed up wet, cold, and asking. At a dingy motel behind a gas station, I handed over my ID and credit card. The man at the desk didn't even blink. He just slid the key toward me like this was normal. The room smelled of bleach and something lemony, like the motel wanted to seem clean but couldn't quite mask the truth. I didn't even take off my shoes, just lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My eyes stayed open long after midnight, not from fear, from clarity. At 4:12 a.m., I picked up my phone. Logged into each account one by one, Bank of America, Chase, PayPal, even Zelle. I began disabling cards. Cancelled automatic payments. Paused every account tied to anyone but me. I stared at one transfer, a recurring monthly deposit to my mother's account labeled household. I deleted it. Each click felt like shedding an old skin. A bad contract I never signed but had followed for years. I've been their backbone, I said out loud. My voice sounded strange, calm, clean. Now let's see how they stand without one. And just as the sun rose, my phone lit up. 69 missed calls. The first thing I heard wasn't birds or traffic. It was the buzz of my phone vibrating so hard on the nightstand it nearly danced off the edge. I didn't need to pick it up to know it had started. I sat up slowly, bones aching from that lumpy motel mattress, and glanced at the screen. 69 missed calls. 18 from Mom. 22 from Jace. 11 from Camille. A scattering from Dad, my cousin Lizzie, and even Mrs. Felton, the neighbor who once borrowed my crockpot and never gave it back. And there it was, dead center in the preview of the most recent text, "Kaylin, call me right now. Don't you dare cut off the mortgage autopay. Not are you okay? Not where did you sleep? Not I'm sorry. Just panic over money." I let the phone fall back onto the thin blanket beside me. The room was stale, the kind of air that never fully aired out. But I breathed easier in it than I had at my mother's front porch. I lay back for a while, staring up at the ceiling's water-stained tiles, letting my muscles unclench. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't lonely. It was honest. Nobody had called me until the money stopped. That said it all. I finally got up and turned off all notifications. I wasn't interested in the pleading, not until they learned how to say the truth out loud. I showered with what the motel offered, a bar of soap the size of a hotel mint and a towel that smelled like bleach and despair. But I emerged clean, clear-headed, dressed in the cleanest jeans I had, a black tee, and the navy blazer I'd stashed in my trunk out of habit. It still smelled faintly of lavender from a client meeting last fall. I looked at myself in the mirror, tired eyes but not broken. By 9:20, I was pulling into the parking lot of a co-working space I hadn't visited in over a year. I used to donate a few thousand each quarter to support their community room. Quiet space for freelance folks, young grads building apps that never launched. I'd never used it myself, until today. The receptionist glanced up and blinked in surprise. "Kane. Wow. Haven't seen you since the panel talk. Want a desk?" I nodded. "Yeah, that would be great." She didn't ask why I had no laptop bag, no briefcase. She just walked me back and offered me a seat by the window. That small act felt more like family than anything I'd gotten in the last 24 hours. I pulled out my tablet, connected to the Wi-Fi, and got to work. Quietly, methodically. First the shared family phone plan, gone. Next, I logged into the trust I'd built. Yes, me. With the help of a law friend years ago to protect family assets. I removed myself from management. No warning, no explanation. Then came the car lease, Mom's second car, the silver one she deserved because she said she'd given up so much raising us. The lease I'd signed for her years ago in a moment of guilt. Click. Cancelled. I didn't smile. I just breathed. I was flagging a fourth auto payment, Dad's magazine subscriptions and satellite radio, when my phone lit up with a new call. Jace this time. I picked up. "Kaylin," he said quickly, voice tight with urgency. "You've made your point. Now stop this. You know Mom didn't mean it like that." "She said it," I answered, while I stood there dripping wet and homeless. A beat of silence. She panicked. "She's old school. You know how she is." I didn't respond. Jace continued, tone shifting like he was reading from a tired script. "Camille told me about the house. We thought you were stronger than this. That stopped me." "You knew? When did the fire happen, Jace?" "Night before last." "Funny. I only found out yesterday. When I showed up to ash and rain." He hesitated. I thought Camille told you. Look, we didn't think you'd break like this." There it was. The sentence that made everything tilt sideways. Not "we forgot," not "we're sorry." They didn't think I'd break. As if I was just a machine that malfunctioned. I ended the call. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there at the co-working desk staring at the tree swaying outside the window. That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't forgotten. I was invisible by design. I spent the next hour at the bank. My longtime manager, Eric, greeted me with his usual calm nod. He didn't say much. He never did. But I could tell he understood. Every financial file, every document I'd once created to help my family, he helped me dismantle, quietly, respectfully. When I stepped back out into the gray afternoon, something inside me felt looser, like I'd unbuckled an old tight belt that had been digging into my ribs for years. I stopped by a food truck near the edge of the co-working lot and grabbed a tuna sandwich and coffee, then headed back to the motel. The roads were damp again, clouds thick, but I drove without music, without thoughts buzzing. Back at the room, I sat down on the bed and opened the sandwich but didn't eat. I looked around at the lamp with the crooked shade, the carpet that hadn't seen a vacuum in weeks, the TV bolted to the wall, and then I folded the napkin that came with my sandwich, not out of nostalgia, just instinct, into a little maple leaf. I placed it gently on my pillow, just like I did all those years ago. Only this time, I wasn't hoping anyone would notice. I wasn't part of the family, I said aloud to no one. I was the funding model. I lay back fully clothed, letting the weight of the day settle. And just before I drifted off, the phone buzzed once. A single text from Camille. No apology. Just 6 words, "You should know Mom lawyered up." Camille's text came in just past midnight. I was lying on the motel bed with my eyes half closed, listening to the low hum of the heater kick on and off, on and off. The screen lit up like it had something important to say. "They're spinning it already. Watch your back. And don't come by." That was it. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I didn't know." Not even "Are you okay?" Just a warning. One that carried the cold weight of quiet betrayal. She wasn't siding with me. She wasn't standing up to them. She was just giving me a heads up like I was a coworker about to walk into a boardroom ambush. I read it 5 times, then turned the screen off. It wasn't until the next morning that I understood what she meant. After brushing my teeth with a travel brush I picked up at the gas station, I sat down at the tiny desk in the corner of the motel room. My laptop had 1 bar of Wi-Fi. That was all I needed. I opened the browser, Typed in the name of the neighborhood Facebook group I knew Mom still used to brag about, Camille's volunteer work or Jace's successful real estate ventures. And there it was, pinned to the top. Prayers up for the family at Sycamore Drive. They've suffered enough. Losing their home, their support system. No one deserves this kind of betrayal from within. My eyes stopped on one comment underneath it. I heard the daughter who'd been funding them just cut them off. No warning. Heartless. I guess some people forget blood ties when the money runs dry. I stared at that sentence for a full minute. Then I closed the laptop because it wasn't a surprise. Not really. Not after Camille's text. Not after Mom's silence that first night. They needed a villain. And I was convenient, the daughter who was too independent, too cold, the one who didn't show up for enough family dinners or drop everything to babysit. I was no longer useful, so they rewrote the story. I wasn't the one who kept the lights on or paid the mortgage when Dad retired early to follow his dream of writing a book he never started. No. I was the saboteur. The traitor. I needed air. I threw on my coat, tucked my laptop under my arm, and stepped outside. The chill hit sharper than I expected, like the air itself didn't want me here. I walked without a clear plan, just moving, letting my boots slap against the pavement until I found myself at the public library. It was warm inside, quiet in a way that felt like sanctuary. I took a seat near the window, opened my laptop again but didn't type. My hands just sat there. Kaylin. I looked up. It took a second to place her gray curls now, but the same sharp cheekbones and smart eyes. Aunt Liza. She was Mom's cousin technically. Never one to meddle, never one to flatter. She just saw things. Hadn't heard from her in years. I thought that was you, she said, holding 2 paper cups of tea. You look tired. I let out a half laugh. That's generous. We moved to a corner room usually reserved for tutors and book clubs. She handed me a cup. No small talk, just a long knowing look. Your mom used to talk about you all the time, she said finally. Said you were distant, cold, even, too practical. I blinked. Even when I bought her that car, especially then, she sipped her tea. She said, Kaylin doesn't hug, but she'll hand you the keys to a Lexus. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I thought she was proud of me. Oh, she was. Liza set her cup down. Proud of your usefulness, not your heart. Never your heart. She liked saying you were the responsible one, but that was just code for the one we can lean on without guilt. Something cracked open in me. All these years I thought if I just kept giving quietly, consistently, they'd finally see me. Not as a bank account, not as a fallback, but as their daughter, their sister, family. But they never wanted my love. They wanted my resources. The lie they told everyone else, that I was distant, uncaring, too business-minded. But the lie they loved, the one that made everything easier for them, was this, that I owed them affection in the form of money, that if I didn't give, I didn't love, and that any boundary was cruelty. I thanked Aunt Liza for the tea and stepped out into the late afternoon light. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to text Camille back either. Instead, I walked. A few blocks later, I found myself outside Camille's gated neighborhood. I didn't even know what I was doing there until I saw the stone pillars and the call box blinking beside the gate. I walked closer. A security guard spotted me. He leaned toward the intercom. You here for Camille? I stood there for 3 seconds. No, I said. And I turned around. Because I wasn't here to beg. I just needed to see it. To prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. That I wasn't welcome anymore, if I ever had been. I was never going to be the sister who dropped by unannounced or got waved through the gate. The wind picked up as I headed back toward town. My hands were cold, but I didn't shove them in my pockets. I wanted to feel it. By the time I got to the co-working space, dusk was settling in. The front desk girl didn't ask for ID, just smiled and buzzed me in. Maybe she remembered me. Maybe she just saw the look on my face and knew not to question it. I sat down at a desk by the window, opened a fresh document, title, What I Paid For. And I started typing, not to rage, not to get even, just to record it line by line. What I paid for. What I was promised. What was taken. Every mortgage. Every tuition check. Every quiet forgiveness. Every time I swallowed the urge to say, this isn't fair. I wrote until my fingers ached. Then I formatted the email. BCC to every cousin who ever asked for a loan. To the church committee mom used to parade me in front of. To the investment club dad introduced me to as our golden goose. And finally to Camille. At the very bottom of the email I typed a single line. You cannot disown someone you never truly welcomed. My hand hovered over the mouse. But I hadn't hit send yet because someone knocked on my motel door. The knock wasn't timid. It came with the weight of years I'd been told to keep quiet and give more. I set my laptop aside and stepped toward the door, peered through the peephole. There she was. My mother. Standing under the yellow flicker of the hallway light, rain plastering her scarf to her neck, her coat clinging to her like armor. She wasn't shivering. She wasn't sorry. She was furious. I cracked the door slowly, still unsure if I'd hallucinated the knock, the image. Her eyes narrowed. We need to talk now. I opened the door wide enough for her to enter. She brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking on the thin carpet like a clock counting down to something I wasn't ready for. Once inside, she turned to face me, arms crossed, still clutching her purse like it contained the last ounce of control she had. You've created a disaster, she said, not even pretending to soften the blow. We've had to delay Camille's mortgage. Your father can't show his face at church without people whispering. He's humiliated. I stood still, hands at my sides, letting her words echo and fall. I didn't speak. She stepped closer. Do you even understand what you've done? And then she said it. The part that slid into my chest and settled like ice. This isn't about the money. It's about how you've made us look. Not about love. Not about hurt. About optics. I blinked. That's what matters to you? I asked, voice quiet. She rolled her eyes. People talk. They assume things. I nodded slowly. Let them. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I took a breath. The silence between us thickened, old and familiar. It wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. For years I said, I gave you whatever you needed. Not because you asked kindly, but because I believed, deep down, you'd eventually see me. Not for what I gave, but for who I was. She said nothing. I've been funding appearances, not people. That stops now. She let out a short laugh, sharp and bitter. So what now? You want us to crawl? To beg you? No, I said. I want you to manage the way I always had to, alone, quietly, without thanks. Her face twisted. You think you're better than us? I looked her in the eye. No. I think I'm just no longer pretending I'm less. That hit. She picked up her purse like a judge closing court. You've changed. No, I said. I just finally stopped apologizing for not being Camille. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob, as if she wanted to say more. Maybe even something real. But old habits die hard. Instead, she gave me one last look that I couldn't decipher. Rage, maybe. Or regret buried too deep to reach. And left. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness return. I wasn't surprised. Not really. But something in me had shifted, solidified. After rinsing my face in the sink, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The rain had thinned to a mist, soft and indifferent. Across the street a neon diner sign buzzed dimly. I walked over. Inside the warmth was instant, vinyl booths, old jazz murmuring from a speaker, and a waitress who didn't ask questions, just brought me coffee and a plate of pancakes I hadn't ordered but ate anyway. I sat in silence, surrounded by strangers who didn't know who I used to be or who I had just become, and that anonymity felt kind. When the check came, the waitress smiled and slid it across the table. "It's been taken care of," she said almost as an afterthought. "A man paid for it before you walked in. Left a note." She placed the folded napkin down. I opened it slowly, fingers unsure. "You were never invisible." That's all it said. I looked up, startled, but the booth near the window was empty. Whoever it was, he was gone. Still holding the note, I pressed it into my coat pocket like it meant more than anything I'd heard in the last 20 years. Back in my motel room the air felt different. Not lighter, but mine. I opened my laptop, clicked through my accounts. There it was. An attempted withdrawal from the old joint account I once stupidly shared with my mother. Denied. I reset every password, locked everything down tight. Then I returned to the email I'd written the night before. The one blind copy to every relative, pastor, family friend, investment partner, the people who always smiled at me but only saw what I could give. I read it through one last time and then I hit send. By morning, the family group chat exploded, and this time I didn't look away. By morning, the family group chat lit up like someone had thrown gasoline onto old dry grudges. First Camille. Her name popped up in bold. "Camille, what the hell is wrong with you?" Then Mom, just as sharp. Mom called me back immediately. "Dad, just seen." No reply. Of course. I sat on the edge of the motel bed scrolling through their outrage with the same detachment I'd have reading someone else's weather report. Cold front coming through. Sure, been living in it. Then the screen blinked. Camille was calling. I let it ring once, twice, picked up. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. Her voice cracked right out of the gate. "You ruined everything," she said, trembling somewhere between fury and panic. "The bank's refusing to extend the credit line. Mom hasn't stopped crying since last night. Dad had to cancel the meeting with the realtor." I didn't respond. Just let her fill the space with the mess they'd made. "You made us depend on you," she continued. "And then you just walked away like none of it mattered." That was the sentence that did it. I leaned back, phone cradled between cheek and shoulder. "No," I said, quiet but firm. "You chose to depend on me. I never asked for that. You built your plans around my silence, not my consent." She fell quiet for a second, but I heard her breathing shift, frustration becoming something deeper. Then, like a dam breaking, the words spilled out. "I didn't have a choice, Kaylin. You had the credit. I needed the mortgage. You said you'd help. And just like that, I was back there. It was 2 years ago. I'd flown in for a short visit. Camille had picked me up from the airport, bubbly and rehearsed. There'd been something in her voice, too upbeat, too polished. "We're meeting with a real estate agent," she'd said casually, like she was inviting me to lunch. I remember parking outside a townhouse just outside Atlanta. Brick, clean-lined, with a backyard so pristine it looked printed. Camille had turned to me, eyes wide with some mix of hope and calculation. "Look," she'd said. "I can cover the payments. I need a co-signer." just to help me qualify. I hesitated. Something about it didn't sit right. Then Mom chimed in over speakerphone, as if she'd been rehearsing her line all morning. "Don't be selfish," she said. "She's your sister." That sentence had always worked on me. Until it didn't. So I signed. I didn't live there. I didn't visit. But I paid the difference whenever Camille's checks ran tight. And every time I asked what happened to her freelance jobs, or why Dad wasn't helping, I got the same vague answer. "It's complicated." No. It was simple. I'd been funding pride disguised as crisis. Now back in that motel room, with her voice still in my ear, I saw it all for what it really was. "You want me to fix it?" I asked. There was a long pause. "She's having a breakdown," Camille said, quieter now. "Mom's doctor said her blood pressure." I cut her off. "She's just now breaking down." After 6 years of me covering bills, sleeping in my car some nights, and being told I was the cold one, I didn't get a doctor. I didn't get breakdown privileges. I just got ignored. The line went silent. Then click. She hung up. I let the phone fall onto the bed, screen facing up like it still had something more to say, but all I could hear was the hum of the cheap motel fridge kicking on and off like it couldn't decide how much to try. I was halfway through brushing my teeth when the motel phone rang. Not my cell. The old beige landline next to the bed. I picked it up. "Miss Holt, front desk, there's a delivery for you." "A delivery?" "Envelope. Courier dropped it off 5 minutes ago." I blinked at my reflection. My towel was still draped around my shoulders. I'd been planning to shower, maybe nap, and not face anyone for the rest of the morning. But now, I threw on jeans and a hoodie, twisted my hair into a low bun, and headed downstairs. The envelope was thick. No name on the outside, just my room number written in a slanted cursive, like someone in a rush. The clerk didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. Back in my room, I peeled it open slowly. Inside, folded papers, crisp. Old insurance header in the corner. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the date, right after the fire. My name had been typed on the beneficiary line, then crossed out. A newer name scribbled in, Camille's. There wasn't even an attempt to hide it. Just ink over ink. Correction fluid. Sloppy. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tracing the outline of where my name used to be. So that was it. I hadn't been abandoned after the fire. I'd been erased long before the flames ever touched the walls. I sat back on the motel bed, the envelope opened beside me like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding but left an ache that wouldn't go away. The documents were old, the kind you could smell, the kind that yellow at the edges. But it was the handwriting that held me still. Right there in slanted blue ink, my name had been listed as the original beneficiary. Then just below it, crossed out. A single line, almost casual. Beneath it, my father's signature, not typed, not notarized, just him and a pen, like he was scratching out a mistake on a grocery list. The new beneficiary, Camille. I didn't shake with anger. It wasn't rage anymore. It was something quieter, more final, like the sound a door makes when it clicks shut behind you. And you know there's no key on your side. 2 years ago, I remembered there had been this red binder Mom handed me after a plumbing issue almost flooded their kitchen. She'd been unusually cheerful that day. "Just in case anything happens," she said, handing it to me like it was a casserole. I'd offered to digitize it, make sure it was all backed up, but she smiled and waved her hand. "No need. We've got it sorted." Back then I believed her. Thought maybe, just maybe, I was being trusted, included. Turns out they'd already made other plans. Plans that didn't include me. I needed answers, not more feelings, not more questions I'd cry into my pillow about. I needed facts. By noon I was pulling into a narrow parking spot near the county records office downtown. The building itself was unimpressive, peeling beige paint, humming fluorescent lights, and a slow-turning ceiling fan that didn't seem to move any air. I approached the clerk behind the glass window. Her nameplate read Deborah, and she looked like she'd seen her share of people trying to pull fast ones. "Hi," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm here to request a copy of an insurance claim filed about 5 weeks ago. It was for a residential fire on Linton Avenue. I believe I'm on the policy." Deborah raised an eyebrow. "Fire claims are sensitive. Only listed beneficiaries or authorized agents can access those." I slid the document from the envelope across the counter. My name was on the original paperwork. "This came in the mail this morning." She took it, adjusted her glasses, and frowned. After a moment she disappeared into the back. 5 minutes ticked by, then 10. When she returned, she had a stapled set of pages in her hand and a crease between her brows. There was an amendment filed 3 weeks before the fire. Beneficiary was updated to a Camille Holt. She paused. "You're not listed anywhere now." My voice came out even. "That's all I needed to know. Thank you." I walked back to my car, closed the door gently, and sat there for a few minutes without moving. My palms rested on the steering wheel. It was the silence inside the car that hit me hardest. Not just absence of sound, but the absence of illusion, of hope. Halfway back to the motel, my phone buzzed. Camille. Her name lit up the screen like a warning flare. I didn't answer, but the message popped through anyway. "Camille, you're being cruel. We're family. You're overreacting." Overreacting. I should have laughed, but I didn't. I just kept driving, eyes forward, one hand tightening on the wheel. At the next intersection, I made an unexpected turn. The lot where the house used to stand hadn't changed much since the fire. The boards were still up, charred beams stacked in uneven piles. The smell was long gone, but the weight remained, like grief that had dried but never really faded. I parked across the street and walked slowly toward the blackened frame. No one stopped me. No neighbors looked out from their windows. Just me, the wind, and what used to be home. Carefully, I stepped over a collapsed beam, picking my way through the ruins. Glass crunched under my shoes. The porch had disintegrated, but the remnants of the living room were still recognizable. Burnt sofa springs, a twisted floor lamp, and part of the wall where our family photos used to hang. Something glinted near the rubble. I leaned down. A picture frame, scorched along the edges, its glass cracked diagonally. Inside was a photo from years ago, just me and my mother standing in front of the same house. I must have been 12 or 13, holding a watering can, Mom with her arm around me. The image had browned around the sides, heat mottled, but our faces were still visible. And it hit me. Not just the betrayal of paperwork and signatures and crossed-out names, but the realization that even this photo, was left behind to burn. I stood there a moment longer, staring at what was once so precious. Then I picked it up, brushed off the soot with my sleeve, and held it tightly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned away and left the ashes behind, for good this time. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the motel parking lot, the evening sun already softening into a dusky gold. I sat there in the car a moment longer, staring out at nothing, fingers resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't thinking about the ashes anymore. Not about the picture, or Camille's message, or even the house. Something had settled in me. A stillness that didn't feel empty, just done. Back inside my room, I dropped the keys on the nightstand and pulled my old laptop from the duffel bag under the bed. It creaked when I opened it, the hinge catching the same way it had for years. The screen flickered on, bringing up the familiar folder I'd used for 6 years, family expenses. I clicked the spreadsheet open. Every line was there. Every check I'd ever written, every online transfer. Cell phone bills when Camille lost her job, rent when Mom said her pension check came late, groceries, school fees for Camille's son when they insisted public school wasn't an option, even their gas cards, all logged with dates, amounts, brief notes. A part of me had kept it out of duty. Another part, maybe out of desperation to prove I was worth something. 143,770.58, I said the number out loud. It didn't echo, but it landed heavy in the room. Then I opened my banking app. By the time the sun was fully up, I was parked downtown in front of the old brick building with iron-framed windows, the main branch of my family's credit union. The same place my parents had set up our first joint account when I was 19 and still believed their promises meant something. Inside, the chill of the air conditioning hit my arms. A bank manager in his mid-50s greeted me behind the glass partition. "I'd like to freeze and close all accounts associated with these routing and linked numbers," I said, sliding the paperwork across the desk. He looked up, blinking. "These are joint accounts with your mother, sister." "Yes," I replied, calm as glass. "And here's the documentation. You'll see patterns of unauthorized withdrawals, inconsistent signatures, and 3 wire transfers in my name without my consent." His brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. He didn't ask if I was sure. 10 minutes later, he returned. "It's done. The accounts are frozen. All outgoing transactions are halted. Credit lines locked. Any cards tied to them will be declined." I gave a small nod. "Thank you." On the way out, I walked past a young couple arguing in the ATM line. I didn't stop. I didn't feel guilty. For once I didn't feel anything but focused. Back in the car I sat with the laptop open on the passenger seat, fingers hovering over the touchpad. I scrolled down to a highlighted line, April 22nd wire to Camille $4,000. Tyrone lost job. I remembered that night like it had just happened. Camille sobbing over the phone, voice cracking as she said they were about to lose their house. I hadn't questioned it. I'd opened my account and sent the money before dinner. I'd eaten cereal for 3 days after. Couldn't pay rent on time. Now staring at that same line I didn't feel shame. I moved the cursor over it and clicked delete row. Gone. My phone buzzed. "Kaylin, it's Armand," came the voice of my attorney when I answered. He never wasted time with pleasantries. "Just a heads up. Camille and her husband filed a countersuit." I rubbed my temple. "Let me guess, wrongful abandonment." Bingo. It's a flimsy filing, emotional distress, financial disruption, you know, all the stuff they never had a problem putting on your shoulders. I let out a quiet laugh. Let them explain to a judge how the abandoned daughter paid off their back taxes and helped fund their kitchen remodel. He chuckled too. "Exactly. I'm not worried, but I thought you should know." "Thanks. Keep me posted." I ended the call, tossed the phone on the passenger seat, and exhaled slowly. By late afternoon the sky had dimmed and the wind was picking up again. I'd stopped by a cafe for tea and checked into a new motel, cleaner, quieter. While the kettle hissed, I heard the phone vibrate once, twice, then it wouldn't stop. I glanced at the screen, 14 missed calls, then 23, then 39. It was like a dam had burst. Camille. Tyrone. Mom. Even Uncle Don. Voicemails poured in. I let them go to inbox. For a moment I stared at the screen before hitting play. "Kane, what are you doing? I just tried to get groceries and the card didn't work. Call me back." Another. Your mother's account is frozen. What is happening? Are you punishing us? Then one from Camille, her voice sharper than before. You can't do this. You owe us after everything we've done for you. I stared at the wall, expressionless. Then I turned the phone off. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. But I did owe one person, myself. I stepped away from the ringing phone and let the silence settle. The motel room had gone dim, the sun fading behind stained blinds. My palms were still warm from holding the last voicemail. But inside I felt cold, steady. Not angry, just done. That night I barely slept. Not because I was restless, but because my mind was sorting through years of mess like an old attic being cleared out, box by box. Around 6:30 I pushed the covers off, brewed the motel's burnt coffee, and opened my laptop again. I knew what I needed to see. The fire report had finally gone public. I searched the department's database, typed the address I knew by heart, and pulled up the document. My pulse didn't even spike. It wasn't faulty wiring like Camille told everyone, not some mysterious freak accident like my mother hinted over the years. It was a space heater left running in Camille's old room. They never told me that. Not once. They let me believe I had left behind something broken, that I was careless, that if I had just been around more it wouldn't have happened. But it had nothing to do with me. It was their neglect, and they buried the truth the same way they tried to bury me. I let the laptop rest against my legs and stared out the window. The air outside felt cooler than usual, cleaner, like it had just rained even though it hadn't. For a long moment my mind wandered back to the first day I moved into that house, 10 years ago almost to the week. I had just graduated from community college. No party, no cake, just a car full of plastic tubs and a grateful heart. I remember painting the walls in that little side room myself, pale green. I chose the color because it reminded me of fresh leaves, new beginnings. I set up a desk next to the window, right beside the heater, the same one they promised to replace. We'll get to it next month, Mom had said, tying her hair back with a rubber band as she passed by the doorway. She never looked up from her phone. They never fixed it. Winter came. I used extra blankets. Summer came. I barely used the room because it got stuffy. The heater stayed. And now that same heater was the origin of the fire, and they never even mentioned it. They just scrubbed me out like a mistake. I closed the laptop and got dressed slowly. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a clean shirt, but I tucked my spreadsheet printout into my bag. I didn't know yet where I was going, but something in me needed to walk, to breathe, to understand all the ways I'd been erased, and to choose, intentionally, not to disappear. I ended up at the public library, a short walk, the air brisk but kind. Inside it was quiet, safe. Hi, I said to the archivist at the front desk. I'm looking for any local news stories from 7 months ago. There was a house fire on Maple Drive. She nodded and disappeared behind a small wall of shelves. A few minutes later she slid a folder onto the table where I waited. And there it was. Local family displaced. Eldest daughter to the rescue. The headline slapped me harder than I expected. The article was glowing. Camille had set up a GoFundMe. Raised $22,000 in 3 days. According to the write-up there were photos, of her, of my parents, even of the charred remains of the front porch. They smiled in front of it, arms around each other like survivors of a war. But I wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even a footnote. I read it twice just to be sure. It was like someone had taken a red pen and crossed me out of the narrative altogether. Not dead, not missing, just deleted. I whispered to myself, barely louder than a breath. I didn't just walk away. They erased me. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I stood, my back ached and the weight in my chest had settled into something solid. Instead of returning to the motel, I drove to the cemetery. The grass was overgrown in places, but I found the plot easily. My maternal grandmother, Delmare, she was the only one who had ever made me feel like I wasn't a burden. When I was 12 and Camille got the flu, it was Grandma who stayed up with me all night helping with my science fair volcano. She told me my mind was worth protecting and that people would try to convince me otherwise. I knelt beside her stone and sat for a long while. "I know you'd say not to fight fire with fire," I murmured. "But you'd also say, don't let them burn your name for warmth, baby." I pulled out a photo, one I'd kept hidden for years. It was me and Grandma at the zoo. She had cotton candy on her cheek and I was laughing. No front teeth. I sealed it in a clear plastic slip and taped it to the back of her marker. A small act, but it felt like closing a door without slamming it. As the afternoon faded, I drove to a small building tucked off the main road. Beige siding, a red door, second floor, no elevator, but it was mine. I unlocked the apartment. The space was humble. Bare white walls, a chipped counter in the kitchen, but it smelled clean, like possibility. I placed my bag down and reached inside. Out came the old spreadsheet. Every dollar I'd spent on that family. Every lie I believed was love. I laid it on the empty dining table and scribbled a new title on top, Proof of Love. And I knew, standing there in that quiet room with nothing but a single bag and my own name on the lease, that love without respect wasn't love at all. It was just debt in disguise. But love without respect is just debt in disguise. I was folding the last of my clean towels, still warm from the dryer, when I heard it. 3 firm knocks, no doorbell, just a pause, then 2 more. I glanced through the peephole. Camille. No heavy eyeliner, no gold hoops. Her hair was tied back in a limp ponytail. She looked older than she had a week ago, tight around the mouth like she'd been biting her words too long. I cracked the door, didn't move back, just looked her in the eye. She didn't blink. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't say yes. I just grabbed my keys and jacket, pulled the door shut behind me. We walked in silence to a small cafe around the corner, not the kind with wait staff, just a counter and a few booths. I nodded at the barista and slid into a booth near the window. Camille sat across from me, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were pale. "Mom's losing it," she said, eyes fixed on a chipped sugar jar. "She's convinced you're out to destroy her. Dad barely talks. He just stares at the garage door like it'll open and you'll walk in." I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence breathe. Camille's voice cracked. "They think you're punishing them. But the truth is you were the glue. You were the only one keeping anything upright." She let out a bitter laugh. "And we kicked you out like you were a burden." I met her eyes. "I know." She blinked rapidly, looked away. "Do you want us to beg?" "Fine." She pressed her palms to the table like she was steadying herself. "I'm begging. Please just help one more time." I set my coffee down. The clink was sharper than I expected. "No." Camille froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. Because it was never one more time, Camille. It was always the next time. And the one after that. "You don't see me. You just see what I can give." For a moment she looked like she might argue, but no words came. Just a shallow breath and the wet shine of pride slipping out of her eyes. We paid separately. I walked ahead as we left. No goodbye. 3 nights earlier I'd written a letter I never intended to send. I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment, wrapped in a blanket with a metal mixing bowl and a box of matches beside me. The letter was simple. No accusations, no demands. "I loved you enough to carry everyone," I wrote. Now I love myself enough to let go. I folded it once, then again, lit a match. Watched the flame curl the paper until the words crumbled to ash. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like sweeping the last soot from the windowsill. Back in the cafe, a young woman in a brown apron brought over my receipt. She looked barely 25, freckles across her cheeks. "You have a calm way of speaking," she said almost shyly. I wish I had that strength. I smiled just a little. I didn't have it. I built it. She nodded like she understood, then walked off to clear a nearby table. I left a generous tip and stepped outside. The light had softened to late afternoon gold, filtering through the trees like everything had taken a breath. My phone buzzed. Voicemail from Mom. I didn't hesitate. Deleted. No guilt. The walk back to my apartment was quiet. Just the hum of passing cars and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. On my kitchen counter a white envelope waited. It was from the nonprofit I'd applied to last month, back when I still wasn't sure I had anything left to give. Dear Kaylin, we're thrilled to welcome you as our newest financial literacy mentor. Your experience and insight will help women regain control of their futures. I stood still for a long moment, hands resting on the edge of the counter. The apartment was modest. Second-hand furniture, soft yellow light from the window, one potted plant I hadn't managed to kill. But it was mine. Mine. I tucked the letter into a folder labeled "Start Here." Then walked to the center of the room. There were no framed degrees, no family photos, just a quiet hum of peace. For the first time in years I wasn't bracing for the next crisis. I wasn't holding my breath waiting for another knock. If it came, I'd answer. But I wouldn't hand over my peace again. Not for guilt, not for history, not for blood. I didn't walk away bitter. I walked away whole.